Well, thanks for joining us for today's webinar on predictive modeling for fundraisers. We're going to take about a half an hour and just run through some use cases, examples, how to build a model, and then we're going to have a half an hour for Q&A. This is a topic that's, I know, had a lot of attention, and this will be tutorial oriented, and hopefully we'll be able to lay out some of the basics and some of the how-tos here. I'm your host. I'm Doug Cogswell. I'm the president and CEO of Advisor Solutions. We're a business intelligence software company. We've got extensive data analytics experience in fundraising in particular, but also other industry sectors, and we've got over 250 fundraising clients from which this presentation is built. So the agenda, we're going to spend a few minutes on just what is predictive analytics. We're going to look at top 10 use cases that we see in our work in fundraising. We're going to go through the keys of building a successful model. And we're going to look at one and actually build one on major giving for attachment, also known as engagement, annual giving, and we're going to look at segmenting non-donors into more likely, middle likely, and least likely populations. These are probably the two most common uses of modeling that we see in fundraising. So let's get started. The concept behind predictive modeling is to use mathematical tools and algorithms to examine and determine patterns in one set of data in order to predict behavior in another set of data. You know, for example, it could be, the data could be, what are the characteristics of my top donors? And modeling will figure out, it's maybe what kind of job they have, how much income they have, where they live, have they been to reunions, all of that. So you get a sense of the unique characteristics of that group. That's called descriptive modeling. And then that can be prescriptive to predict behavior of other groups of people who maybe are not your large donors today, but you want to score them and rank them because you want to, if they have those same characteristics, they're more likely to be a large donor than somebody else, and that would be determining of whether you staff them or maybe how you solicit them or, a set of other things. And just technology-wise, it integrates well with in-memory data and data visualization into data discovery and analysis tools like the ones we provide. So, top 10 use cases. This is from our work, and, over and over again, major giving, attachment scores, probably the #1 use we see of predictive modeling, and it's trying to look at all the expressions of opt-in interest. Somebody comes to a reunion, they come to an alumni event, they make a gift, they click on a newsletter, they're telling you they're interested in you, and that aligned with capacity is probably the two best predictors of somebody's ability to make a larger gift. The second thing is expected ask value. So there's a combination of things, attachment plus maybe industry plus of other things that determine wealth or income that go together to help you determine, should I be asking somebody $2 million, $500,000 or $20,000. Big differences there. And most field officers can close the lower level deals, but if they're closing $20,000 deals at a high yield but should be asking $1 million, $2 million, leaving a lot of money on the table. So the modeling is really useful there too in major giving portfolios to make sure we're soliciting at the right level. The third use is ranked lists for a program. For example, maybe I'm raising money for financial aid matching grants, and there's a set of characteristics of people who have given to financial aid matching grants in the past. Modeling will determine and help me understand what they are and what the weighting is, and then I can score the rest of my population and get ranked lists of who has not had that behavior but who looks like the people who did. And similarly for planned giving. In annual giving, one of the most common use we see is segmenting non-donors. Like most of our clients have a vast pool of non-donors. And some of them are more like the recently acquired non-donors, and some of them are kind of like that, and some of them are not like that at all. Some of the non-donors are more likely to give, and if you can match that with the second thing, what the appropriate ask amount is, and what kind of appeal message most aligns to who they are and what their interests might be, you're more likely to raise more money, get higher yields, all of the good stuff there. So I guess that gets us to 7, and then other. We do more and more work in healthcare fundraising, and they're patient potential. So, a patient has a set of experiences in the provider, and depending on what they are, who they're with, how long they are, when they occurred, creates conditions where that patient is more likely to be a donor or less likely to be a donor, kind of like the attachment scores up above for the advancement operations. This is for the experience the person had in the provider. Event attendance. We've got clients on alumni relations, or they have different clubs, and trying to figure out if you put on an event, who are the most likely people to invite. Or if I'm doing one of these overseas trips, there are certain people who are more likely to be interested in that, and you can cut your mailings back so you don't mail everybody. You mail the people who have a higher likelihood to want to go because they look more like the people who have gone in the past. And ad hoc hypothesis testing, and this could be as simple as, I think these types of events are more likely to help people donate more. That would be they have higher influence on giving than these other types of events. Well, you can run a model against your events attendance table, and it'll tell you that, yeah, these kinds of events have higher influence on people giving more. These types of events might be neutral, and these types of events might actually be negative. And that'll help determine what kind of events you run and where you actually want to target your best prospects, presumably the events with higher lift and higher influence versus lower lift or even negative influence. So this is just from what we've seen in our clients, the kind of models that are most done. And we're today going to focus on two of them, attachment scores in major giving and segmenting non-donors in annual giving. So we're going to move into building a model. There's a few basic concepts. There's a target, which is the behavior you want to examine. There's a base population, which is a group that has the potential to have the experience or the behavior of the target. So let's just, for this, if I am trying to forecast attachment of major donors, I probably want to set a base population of people who have a capacity over a certain amount. I want everybody to be able to make a large gift. The issue is some of them have and some of them haven't. So we're going to look a little later. Let's say my base population, I want to select everybody who has a capacity over $100,000. And then my target would be, there's two forms of doing that, a classification model where the target is a subset or a group. I might target everybody who has already given over $100,000 and has that capacity. I would want to figure out what made them different than the people who had the capacity but didn't give, and the modeling will figure that out. I can also do a regression model where I'm trying to forecast a number. They're sisters and brothers, really, but this is, I want to forecast giving amount. So instead of are they in the group or not in the group, it's like how much would they give? But the concept is the same. There's a target, a behavior. You've got to compare it to a base population that can be reasonably expected to have the behavior. And if you're doing a regression model trying to forecast large giving amounts, you could use the entire base population, but the problem is you're going to distort it because there's a huge number of people who don't have the potential to make these large gifts. So you prefer to all of these major giving models to start with a base population of people who at least have the potential to have it, and then work from there. Otherwise, you're going to have distortion with huge numbers of people who don't have the potential to have the behavior. Hope that made some sense. Then there's explanatory factors. This is stuff from your data, factors that might explain why the target is different than the other entities in the base population or what drives the variation. We'll go through this in more detail as we get into building an attachment model and a non-donor segmentation model. But this is sort of a iterative exercise of thinking through, I have all this data, it might be in my Razor's Edge or my advanced system, it might be in a spreadsheet, it might be in some event management system that's dumping stuff into SQL Server. Think broadly about all the stuff you have and what out of that might help you untangle what makes a target different than a base population. And there's a bunch of tools, we have them, other people have them, that can help you get the data from one system to another and aggregate and group it, do whatever is necessary to turn it into an explanatory factor. The last principle here is causation, which is not the same as correlation. We're big believers that the internal teams should be building these models because it's the understanding of the potential relationships. And the math's going to figure out that something's correlated with the target's behavior, but is actually causing it. And reasons these could be different. If you put giving amount, how much they've given, in a model where you selected the target based on how much they gave, the model is going to come back and tell you how much they gave determines how much they gave. That's not causal. It's correlated. Or perhaps you staff people based on how much they give. The ones who give more, you put a staff on. The ones who don't, you don't. So if you put staffing in the model of predicting large donors, you're going to find out that somebody being staffed is correlated with somebody making a large gift, but it's not causal. It didn't drive the behavior. It occurred because you staff them because they had had the behavior. So that process of trying to untangle, causation from correlation is really important. And you want to make sure, and as you iterate through the model, that the explanatory factors have a potential causal relation with describing why the target is different. There's a tool here from the Gartner group that I think captures this. This modeling is an iterative process. You bring in raw data, you explore it, you transform it, you bin it, you group it. You'll see more of that in a minute. You improve it, you do it again, you study it, you look at it, you make sure it makes sense. And after a while, after a number of runs through this and people discussing it, you end up with knowledge gain, reusable transformations that you can put into your system and use that to score people. But it's not like, hey, here's a model, go use it. No, here's a model. Some of this makes sense. Some of these factors don't make sense. What's up with the ones that don't make sense? We had one example where it was a reunion or an alumni survey where they were surveying people who had an interest in financial aid matching grants, and that was highly correlated with the behavior of giving to financial aid. And in the room we were discussing, but the problem was we edited that because we knew some people had an interest in financial aid because they had made the gift, so we added that to the independent response. So now you have a blend. Well, then of course that's no longer that's not a causal factor because it was put in because they had already had the behavior. So that whole process of thinking it through and iterating it is really, really important. So those are some of the basics. Now let's go a little deeper. I think we're going to have some fun with this. We're going to look at pager giving and go through, what are the questions you're trying to answer? Do we want a composite score, one integrated score, or several separate factors? One model or several? How to prep the data. And then we're going to set up and build a model and look at what to do with it. So high level, let's get started. Well, what questions are we trying to answer? So this is really important. We have seen people build models. It seems like they're just building models for the sake of building models. A good model is going to answer a specific question that you need answered. And so let's say, what are the characteristics of my top donors? That's a good question. Who else has those characteristics and should be staffed? That's a related question because the model will help untangle what makes the top donors different. And then the scoring is going to come and show who else could have that. So next question is, what do you want? A composite score or separate factors? Let's take a look at that. Often, the answer to that question will come in something called a major giving likelihood number. And there's a variety of these out there. And then sometimes they run from 0 to 1,000. Sometimes they run from 1 to 10, whatever. The problem is there are at least two factors that make that up, and they're independent factors. Capacity, which you don't have much control over, and attachment, also known as engagement, which you have a lot of control over. So the problem with the composite score is two people with capacity of $1 million, one could have a higher score, one could have a lower score because one's more engaged or attached and one is less. Well, the issue is maybe the one that's less attached is less attached because that person has not been to a reunion recently and not been on an alumni committee. And your team, knowing that for cultivation, can change that behavior and therefore change the attachment score, and that person could be an awesome prospect. So we really like, and you'll see in a few minutes when we actually use a model, breaking these apart. And also for most development managers and field officers, it's much easier to grasp the concept of somebody's got capacity and somebody's attached. And why are they attached? They're attached because they've been to all the reunions, they've been on committees and so forth. Then it is, this guy's got a score of 630 and somebody else has a score of 430. That's a lot more debatable and it's more confusing to most people. There are a couple of other factors that would kind of help answer this question. If you can call out what their interest areas are, and you can get that often out of reunion surveys or newsletter click-throughs or events that come to a reunion. There's a variety of ways of trying to untangle that, and also life stage. And there are other things you could add into this model. But our concept is we generally prefer to keep the factors separate for the reasons I just ran through. And if you look at the inputs, capacity, most of you do wealth screens. We often see part of the pool is wealth screened. There's a bunch of zip code wealth information out there that can be combined with it. So we'll often, if the person has a wealth screen score, great. If they don't, we can bring in wealthy zips, so at least everybody gets some kind of a score, and sometimes there's surprises. And we're doing some work on the healthcare side where you have patients, tons of patients coming through, and it's not feasible to well screen all of them. But you can, if you have zip codes, put a zip score on them, and you've got a patient potential score. So you're going to flag the people who are in the high-end zip codes with these higher patient scores, and then maybe well screen them and go deeper on them. So the variety of reasons, we believe there actually could be multiple inputs to the capacity equation. And ultimately, the team, your research team or the field officers are going to look at this and say, I get this, but it's actually wrong. The guy's got a capacity of this because I've talked with him and I've seen his numbers or whatever. So capacity, there's at least 3 inputs. The attachment, there's a set of things we work with, and we'll go a little deeper in this in a few minutes, but what committees have people been on? This is usually one of the top factors because they're much more engaged. They're working with classmates. They're on some core issue of the university or the healthcare institution or the nonprofit. Coming to events is typically next. Depends what the events are. Have they been to reunions? Are they consistent givers? Do they click through in the newsletter? Back in time, did they play sports when they were there? Were they on activities? What do they do in social media? Now, this gets a lot of hype, but at every bit of research we've done, it falls behind these other opt-in expressions of interest in the things you're running. We see people go crazy over the social media and not do anything with their own clicks on their own newsletters or with their own committees and so forth. So that's topic 1. Topic 2 is one model or several. The question is, can everyone have the same experience? So here's my university, and if I'm looking at this thing, I've got several different constituent groups. Hospitals would be the same. I've got alums, like they actually come to reunions, they played sports, they did things there. Parents can't have the same experiences, so if you put parents in the same attachment model as alums, they're going to lose because the things that matter the alums can do, the parents can't do, so they're going to get downweighted. So they can't have the same experience, so they need a different model. Friends, the same issue. They're different than parents. Organizations are different yet. So that's level 1. Level 2 is a lot of our clients have different constituents. You have to ask the question, do undergrad alums have the same experience as the law school alums or the engineering grad school alums? Well, no, because these people are there a shorter period of time. They don't play sports. The reunions are different. They've already got an affiliation to something else, so probably not. So we ask our clients to be thoughtful, be sensible, and experiment. But in this case, we probably say model 1, the biggest group is undergraduate alums, and do an attachment model on them first. Maybe then see with the law school if you take the same factors, but more likely you'd want to maybe use the same factors but have a model 2 that weights them differently. And we just finished this work with a large state university that has, I think it's 15 or 16 cohort groups. We actually built 17 models. It didn't take us that long. Once we got the first one done, the data prep was largely the same. We just ripped off the other ones. And there's one attachment score because we rolled them all together, but the mathematics and the factors behind the scores are very different for the business school, from the law school, from the undergraduate parents. And we've seen people get this all like entangled, and it's my university, but it's actually not. You have different groups underneath it. And the key question is, if the people can't have the same experience, they can't be in the same model because you're going to overweight one and underweight the other. And this is not hard stuff, but it's well worth doing the thought process up front before you get too far into it. The next question is, what about the data? What factors might influence undergraduate alums to give, and who else has those characteristics? So all of you got some kind of a course system, and there's an entity table, and it's got some data in it. It's usually got biographical stuff, geographical stuff. Usually there's wealth scores in there, class year, affiliation. Healthcare and not-for-profits have some different stuff in there, but there's a wealth of information in here. But we encourage people to think broadly about what else is there. Well, if it's an institution of higher ed, there's degrees. But degrees by themselves are just a list of degrees. But maybe advanced degrees, or if they have an MBA or a JD, MD, that's an indication of a higher earning potential. So you can create flags in the degrees table for these things and then flag the entities if they have these, and that starts becoming useful. What about employment? That's another table that many of you have filled out. Well, by itself, it's a list of jobs, but you can match out on the titles. Do they have a top-level job? If so, they're higher income earners. What field of work are they in? Some industries pay higher than others. And this kind of stuff will complement the wealth screening on the capacity side and give you more indicators of what's going on. Student activities. People play a lot. I mean, we start out by just looking how many sports, how many activities, and that's usually predictive. What about giving? We like to flag out how many of the last 5 years they made a gift. It's a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Years 6 to 10, another 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe the maximum gift. If you're predicting giving size, you've got to watch the giving amounts, but the consistency is an indication of connection and attachment. Then there's a bunch of other stuff, activities, event attendance. Most of you track that somewhere. One question is how many in the last 5 years or 6 to 10 years back? We actually will often break it in a 2-year period too. This stuff fades with time, but if they've been to an event more recently, and more events more recently, it's a really good indicator of attachment. Then what comes up by type of event, because if event attendance actually pops up high, you want to then go in and look at are all the events the same, and you can run modeling against the event attendance table. I gave an example in the ad hoc example earlier, and we'll flag that some events have more positive influence, some are more neutral, some are negative. You might then want to group numbers of the positive events in the last couple of years, numbers of the neutral events, numbers of the negative events, and use that in the modeling. But this data is there, and it's not that hard to format into these types of metrics. You might want to also call out volunteer committees. Often they're in the event table, and a committee is usually a more substantive interaction and longer-term engagement. Newsletter click-throughs. Very few people do this, but the numbers of clicks they made in the last 12 months and what they clicked on is highly predictive and worth getting the data and calling it out. Reunion surveys, to the extent this data exists and you can call out interest relationships, if you can ask people questions, that can also come in. And then social media. And again, in our world, social media gets a lot of attention, but it's less relevant than the rest of this type of information, which is a direct opt-in expression of interest in you or your institution. And then you create these things and they come back to the entity table, because the modeling will generally run against the entity table. You want one row per person and all these factors about them. And this stuff is, in worlds like ours, not that hard to set up. So let's build one. So we're going from concept. Take a couple minutes to build a model, and then we'll show how you use it. So the attachment model is what we're going to build, because we're looking at major potential for undergraduate alumni major donors. We've got capacity, we need attachment. So what causes some people to give at or above their capacity, and who else looks like that? So the target is undergraduate alums who have given at or over 100,000, and the base population is all undergraduate alums who are rated 100,000 or more. So they have the potential, and some of them gave and some of them didn't. Explanatory factors would be things that include indicate opt-in interests, such as committee participation, events, reunions, giving, newsletter clicks, student sports, student activities, and all of that. And this is where, again, think broadly about what else you might have somewhere in a system, a spreadsheet, something you can get your hands on. It's going to help explain why the target is different than the base. And then in our world, we do regressions and advisors, because that's who we are. It's a point-and-click interface. Somebody who's Excel savvy can do this. They don't need a stats degree, don't need database query skills. The data prep is in an integrated in-memory pool in our app, where you could do combinations, aggregations, binning, cross-table calculations. All the stuff that was in that prior data map page can be done in a desktop app like this without touching the databases. You might then want to put it back in the database if it's a valid transform, but you can play around, muck around in an analytical sandbox without having to touch and have a DBA work on the database. And then you can test, iterate, explore using interactive visualization, and these models typically complete, a few 20, 30 seconds to 4 or 5 minutes for bigger ones with maybe 1 million entities or so. So let's look at one. This is an example of our interface. So somebody dropped the data down, so it's base populations, people with a capacity over 100,000. And then you select the target graphically. Here's a bar chart of how much people have given, from 25 million or more down to no gift. So we selected everybody who's given, 100,000, 250, all these different ranges. And then over here, the target's 1,277 people, and the base population is saying 24,953 people. So then we click here to build a model. That's literally, somebody did the data prep work, and then I select this, click, this modeling panel comes up. I type in attachment. I'm in the field, the table entity. That's other tables in this thing. I'm working with that one. I'm using my current selection, which is the top part of that bar. And I created these factors about numbers of alumni committees, numbers of gifts. These are all the things we talked about a minute ago in the data transform. So I'm checking them off because I want to look at the things that are often expressions of interest, because I'm trying to focus on attachment here. I'm going to take off and not check a bunch of other things. And then I click down here, I've set the training subset. I'm going to train the model. I click that, and it comes back with a model. First model, I probably want to iterate it a few times, but I've got a reasonable concordance, or R squared. It tells me that reunion participation has the most influence on this group, almost 40%, followed by volunteer committees in the last 10 years, alumni committees, student activities, gift giving in the last 5 years. This is helpful for me to understand what's mattering and what's determining and lifting people up to higher giving levels. I go, hey, but almost everybody, a lot of people come to reunions. There's not a lot of people on committees. Why is this so high? Well, there's some factors over here. Like if I actually get on a committee, it's got a much bigger coefficient than if I come to a reunion. So I'm actually looking at this. There's a bunch of math over here, which is the most complicated we get. But you can sort of see that reunions are important because they impact more people. But for those on volunteer committees, it's got a really high coefficient or lift. So I've got some understanding of this. So I like my model. It creates a score. It ranges from 0 to 1. We like to bin the scores. And then what's really important is how these models get put into play, because if you put a score of 0.8 out to most teams, they're gonna freak out. Many researchers, and especially field others, people using this are not going to relate to that. So we are huge believers in getting those scores binned and named in a very simple format. So here, we're looking at attachment scores, and I'm actually going to open this up live, but come out of the PowerPoint for a minute. And we've taken that ranged score and binned it into 5 groups. 5 groups is a nice balance, and we've got the highest group called owners. They're over here on the right. There's 584 of them. The next group is highly engaged, and you can sort of see the splits. The 0.3 and above are owners, the 0.2 and above are highly engaged, and then is engaged, detached, and disconnected. We'll go into more detail in a minute. But the owners are people who have all those things. They've been to a lot of reunions. They've been on committees. They've given consistently. They played student sports. The disconnected for a higher ed institution, graduated and fled. They've not had those experiences. And then here's capacity. The top is a 1 rating, 50 million or more, and this group, the bottom, is a 25 to 50,000. And you can sort of see we tile in the coloring. So the hotter color here are the higher capacity in the blue. I see I've got some high capacity disconnected people. But I want to use this now. I'm the development lead, and I want to find out, do I have any high capacity, highly engaged people who aren't staffed, and who are they, and what do I want to do with them? So I can go over here. Let's grab everybody who's got a capacity of 500,000 or up. I just sweep over the bars. I grab these 5 bars and drop in on them. And let's grab the ones who are also highly engaged in owners. So I sweep over those bars and drop in on them. So now I've got 1,527 people. Some of them have already given a lot. Some of them down the bottom of the list haven't. If I just scroll down the list, the numbers are going to drop. Some smaller amounts. But these are all people who meet these 2 characteristics. And let's go to the staffing page. So I just click on another page. And here's the staffing assignments for those 1,527. 269, this top bar, don't have anybody assigned as a major gift officer. Megan's got 116, it runs down. Dan Law has 67. He's got this bright red of the highest capacity, next highest capacity. He's got the cream of the crop. So I often joke, hopefully Dan Law is like really good. But I'm looking at this group, this 269, like as a development manager, I'm concerned. So let's grab them. Where they live. All over the country. Well, I'm going out to the Bay Area. Let's grab the ones in the Bay Area. Just grab them on the map, drop in on them. Let's go look at their attachment scores. So here's looks like 24 prospects who have high capacity, are highly engaged owners, and live in the Bay Area, where I'm going next week. And the highest one here is David Prado, who's an owner. He's been on no volunteer committees. So we like to start with these descriptive, these handles, but then it's very important to let the team see why the score is the way it is. And this guy's the way he is because he's given the last 5 years, the 5 years before that, a ton of reunions, sports, and activities. You know, the numbers run down. These are a little less, but these are all high. But the thing that jumps out as I'm looking at this list is only one of them, this person, Adrian Edver, has been on a volunteer committee, and this is the most influential thing I do. So for my dinner, I'm going to set up in the Bay Area, and I can export this list out and get somebody ready on it. I'll probably want to have some really good volunteer committees to get this whole group on and get them going. And before I do go to set my meeting up, let's look at the giving history of the group. You know, Virginia's given $1.3 million. These are all $500,000. Why? There's a whole bunch of people here, 1,000 to 5,000. You know, this group in here is way under their capacity, and they've been consistent over time, but you know, not a whole lot. Let's look at Bethram Eckstein. I'm just setting up for my dinner. $89,000 total. Back in 11, a big gift, but generally smaller. What's this look like per year? So I'm like setting up for my dinner. Sort by hard credit. One $60,000 gift, 2,000, a lot of really small gifts. So this is a person who's highly engaged, high capacity, given consistently, got to be to my dinner. Let's get this person on a volunteer committee. But I went through that because I think it's important. We see a lot of teams do the modeling, but then it comes out so complicated that nobody can figure out what to do with the scores. And we see often these scores sit on the sidelines versus being in play like this. These things should be used all the time to help, you know, staff the pools. The scores, if they're embedded in the system like we embed them, they update every day. So this is dynamic. If somebody, you know, is detached and went to a reunion and joined a committee, they might jump up to highly engaged. And you'd like to know that. And you'd like to see those results pan out. So that's major giving. I'm going to close with annual giving. I apologize, I'm probably going to run over 7 or 8 minutes here, but chew into our Q&A a little bit. So annual giving, a major thing we do, we see our clients doing is segmenting non-donors. And the idea here is to study non-donors who have been recently acquired. Who are they? What are their characteristics? Who else has similar characteristics? And typically we see 3 groups emerge. They look like our donors, they might give or they won't give. And here's an example from some recent work. In this world, you got to break it. Graduates less than 5 years and graduates older than 5 years, because the less than 5 years are not going to have graduate degrees. Their job levels are going to be lower. There's a whole set of things that they're going to look very different than the older graduates. And you know, here's just a set of characteristics that the model produced that describe the characteristics of the non-donors who were recently acquired out of the young alums, and this is for the older ones. And what you end up doing is realizing that if we focus our appeals down on this group, we're going to get higher returns. And that's important because often what happens is, we see this a lot, typically 10 to 15% of the appeals work to acquire non-donors, but teams often send everybody everything. And you should measure and focus on what works and send primarily to look like our donor segment. In successful appeals, the challenge is they're usually higher touch. And that could be from a class agent who knows the prospect. It might be a personalized letter or a call. Or they might be theme-based to the prospect's interest areas. For example, a healthcare message to medical professionals, or a short message to an alum who always clicks on sports article, a sport message who always clicks on the sports articles. So if you can do this and focus on the people with the higher characteristics, you're going to get a higher return. And this ties into the next point, is the touch points. Because you need to do this, you need to send appeals to that group, at least 6 to 12 per year, with these appeals that are effective. And often that's not what happens. You want to send each entity in the target segment 6 to 12 effective appeals per year. The problem is often over a touch with unsuccessful appeals. We've seen 50-plus appeals to over half the non-donor base, heavy email. And you undertouch with the successful appeals. The same client, only 1 to 2 successful appeal touches per year to the people in the target segment because they sent too many to the other people. It gets distracted. And why? The higher yield appeals generally cost more. And so to get the touch points up to the reasonable levels with the people who are more attractive, you need to cut the base back so you get, you might send the same amount, but you're going to send more to a smaller group and then drop some of the rest of it. And that's why segmenting the non-donor base to focus on the look like my donors is really important. And I just, we kind of went a little deeper here on how to apply the modeling, but we see this over and over again, and we've seen substantial improvement potential. This is from a webinar we did a little over a year ago with Northern Illinois. It's up on our page. You can see it at the bottom if you want to go deeper. But they found they took this approach. They used analytics modeling to segment the non-donors, and all major mail solicitations were sent to less people and made more money each of the last 3 fiscal years. One particular one, the holiday cards revenue tripled in 1 year when they sent 5,000 less pieces. So they cut the sends by 25%, but tripled the revenue. And that's the goal here, because you need to get the velocity of the right kind of appeal with the right kind of group to get the revenue. The revenue was up over 70%. The average gift size up 60%. Acquired 17% more donors, and first-time donor retention went up from 23 to 30%. So that's a great example of using a non-donor segmentation model to cut the group that you appeal to down. Use this analytics to find the appeals that work more effectively with that kind of non-donor, and then up the touch points by cutting back on others so you can focus on that group. And we've got a number of clients that have had results like this, and it's exciting. I mean, this is what analytics should do. So as we go to Q&A, our summary points, when we see predictive modeling work well, it's focused on answering questions in English language that actually matter. We believe it's best done in-house because your team knows the data, and sorting through causal versus just correlated, sorting through, is this data actually saying what we think it says? That kind of discussion, that iterative process, if you farm that out to consultants, they're doing that, and they don't know the data, they don't know the stuff underneath it like you do. Our view is the modeling is not the tough part, it's the discussion that goes with it that's the really valuable part. So your team doing these kinds of models and having these kinds of discussions, it's just going to get better results. And we like starting simple, don't overcomplicate. Somebody said a simple model completed now is much, I added the word, much better than a complex model that takes forever. And we see teams trying to do this, our models, might have 5, 10, you saw the one we did had maybe 8 or 10 factors. 190 factors, 150 factors, 99 factors, that's crazy. You don't need that. Usually there's a half a dozen, 10 things that really matter. If you could think that through and just start there, you could add more later, but you don't have to go crazy at the beginning. And it gets you going, it gets some results, it starts some momentum, it builds confidence. Iterate and evolve, experiment, use common sense. Like that's sort of totally the key to this thing. This is not a black box. Use the data you have. Don't go crazy with social media and other extras. We've seen teams, for some reason, think that they're going to get LinkedIn or Facebook likes, and they spend all kinds of time doing that, and they don't actually have their own attendance data bid in any reasonable way or in any kind of metric that they can use. And every time we do this, that comes out higher. And embed it. Embed it in your data discovery or reporting system so that it updates and you can keep using it. We see this stuff sometimes come in as a report or a table, and it sits on the sideline, and capacity is reasonably stable, but attachment changes. Non-donors, people in those segments change. And if you're not scoring your data every day or in the core systems, you're getting behind. And that just seems crazy because it's not hard to take the output from the models and then have it embedded so that maybe overnight you pull from your data sets, everything gets rescored and represented. So you come in tomorrow, you've got updated, fresh, relevant data. That's sort of as we look at this, our messages to all of you. And we just encourage people to do it in-house and use it in decision making, and it can be extremely effective. So we ran over a little bit on the main presentation. Let's go to Q&A. And this has been recorded and will be posted on our webinar's website. We'll let you know when it's up there. It will be within the week. And there are other related tutorials that are up there, and that's my contact information if you want to grab me. So I'm going to go to the questions. And there's a chat box, question box down at the bottom, which if you put something in there, we will find it. So here's one. What options do nonprofits have to use predictors when they don't have much data compared to educational institutions other than giving history basic bio-geo information? Yeah, great question. So higher ed institutions are blessed because they've got like this group of people that like stay with them for 50 years and they keep coming back and giving them information. Healthcare is one level down from that but they've got this experience that happens, inside where there's a bunch of stuff. Most not-for-profits don't have that, and we do a bunch of work with them, so the data is thinner. But you want to get, they've got this two same concepts if you want to find donor potential. Capacity, and if you can't wall screen everybody, grab zip code stuff. There's two versions of it. One's housing value, and one's average income. So some communities have high incomes, but they're not in high property values. We generally like the income one better, but we'll merge them. We'll use both of them. But you can apply that if you're U.S.-based to anybody you have a zip code for, and it gives you some clues. The next one is you want whatever you do with your base, track it. Newsletter click-throughs, for a lot of not-for-profits is the best thing. And wherever your newsletters get sent from, there's a database that's tracking the clicks. You don't want the aggregates. You want to know that Mary Smith at 2 p.m. in the afternoon clicked on this article in your newsletter, and then she came back at 6 p.m. and clicked on another article. So the database actually has each person and each click they did with a timestamp. And so you know how many times they've clicked, and you actually know the URL of what they clicked on. So that's telling you what they clicked on. If you name them appropriately, you can index them back. Say, hey, this person comes in all the time and is really interested in my work in, Africa. And this person comes in all the time and is really interested in my work in South America. That's telling you a lot. And most people, and most of our clients don't use that data, and it's right there and it's available. The second thing is any events you run, make sure you capture it. Obviously, somebody comes to an event. We have worked with one not-for-profit where we help them create regional events. So we have the ambassadors in their regions. We did home-based events with them, and people would come, and we would track that. So we would get like opt-in interest by and we knew the relationships and also the people who were coming more, and obviously the giving frequency. But yeah, so not-for-profits, you've got stuff like that is helpful. You don't have the richness of a higher institution, but there's enough there, and we've done the work in that sector that the attachment modeling and then combined with the capacity is indicative. And it helps you. None of this is deterministic. It's directional. It gives you a sense that this group is better than this group to focus on. So directionally is what it gives you, and there's enough there. Hopefully that answered the question. Next question. Higher ed question. Great. What are good predictive factors for new parents with light info in the database? Yeah, so that actually sounds a lot like the not-for-profits. I mean, and you could, so in my not-for-profit answer, I also gave, there's examples where you can engineer events that are trying to draw people in and get them to express an interest. So you got to just think that through, and newsletters is one. Any kind of events that they come to, if you put on, there's a parents' weekend and you put on classes or sessions and track who comes to it. I know some of the schools do that. I know some of the schools do that at reunions too. So you've just got to be thoughtful. Obviously, parents are going to be less engaged than alums, and so you've got to be creative in that way. What option? Oh, here's another one. Those look like the same questions. Okay, yeah, those are the same questions. There's a question about a more technical one about modeling algorithms. Let me paraphrase this. So, Advisor, we use regression algorithms, multivariate regression algorithms. And in the description, we talked about two primary models. One is like a set membership. It's called the classification model. So regression algorithms can figure out, like, why one group or one set differs from another group or another set. It can also forecast the number. And there's times when you want to do both forms of it, and times when only one form would work. If you're trying to figure out event participation, you can't, it's not a number. They're either going to come or they're not going to come. So that'd be a classification or a set membership model. You know, giving large donation amounts could be either. Generally, the curve is so distorted at the high end, it's hard to do a regression forecast because you try to forecast this long tail of this big curve. So the set membership generally works better, but you could do either way. Forecasting mid-level donation, yeah, you can actually use the regression to forecast, you know, how much you'd expect somebody to give. And that was one of the major model uses. There are a whole variety of other modeling algorithm types, and there's tools like R and SAS out there that let you do it. I would say that, though, you know, you're adding complexity. So we're big on keeping things simple, and this is not like there's other areas where you're forecasting things like production lines where something goes wrong, the whole thing blows up or something, where you might want to run several forms of models, and there's a set of other things you might want to look at. Here the data is not that complex. It's not a mission-critical operating system. So, you know, our experience has been these basic algorithms are more than enough. And what really matters, if we go back, is using this as a team. You need, so our view is you're better off having intuitive modeling ability and output that can drive discussion, and having some really rich, complicated, you know, whatever model that nobody in the team quite understands what's going on, but there's a modeling expert who will tell you everything you need. We'd rather see the team discussing it. So a perspective on that. Yeah, another question is on the data prep. Let me paraphrase this one. Well, if I go back, let me just go back to the page with the data, that hand-drawn thing. I'm backing up here as fast as I can. This one. We've had some questions that not all of you have all of this. Got it. And so this question is a more technical one. Tools like ours can pull data from different systems. So suppose this is a Blackbaud Razor's Edge system. This is all in a SQL Server database, and they would have these different tables. And this could be over here in some other event system. It could be an Oracle database, or maybe the newsletters come down in, you know, a text file. So technically, you could actually have one system, another system, something third. This might be something else. That's fine. There's a bunch of these front-end business intelligence discovery tools that can load data. We would say access multiple systems. And so, you know, we would, at, say, 3 in the morning, sweep up all this data. We would access it. We would then blend it. They would all end up, we run in memory, so it would look like this map in memory wherever we're running. And then we synthesize it. So all these calculations would then get executed, and then we would copy them across the table. So the tools that do this, you could obviously do this in the database, but there's a bunch of front-end tools like ours that literally would sweep this whole thing in. It would take us maybe, I don't know, something like this, if it's maybe 700,000 entities, and maybe the giving tables, you know, 20 million gift records or something, and the event attendance could be 8 million event attendance records. Typical size, we'd load that out of databases in maybe 10, 15 minutes at 3 in the morning. We'd plop it in our app. We'd execute all these things after we did it. And the user would have this. Their start time would be, you know, maybe 10 to 30 seconds, 40 seconds, depending on what's going on. Boom, up and running. And then if you wanted to change it, in our world, it's Excel-savvy users with like macros like Excel. You could rewrite some of these expressions, like if you wanted to do a different match on the job title, or you want to change it so there's a 2-year instead of just a 5 to 6 to 10 year. Somebody with Excel-savvy skills would be able to do that. It's just a macro up on top of this event attendance table, which executes here, and then it gets copied back over here, and then the model will pick up the changes and rerun. So this also gets overcomplicated, because if you try to do this in the database, somebody who's the DBA is going to have to help you with it, and they're probably not going to like having all this stuff added to the database tables. You might have to, you know, add additional tables to a warehouse or something. Well, these discovery tools like ours, you don't have to do any of that. You don't need the warehouse or the mart. You can sweep in, if some of these are in a warehouse or mart, load them in. If some of these are source tables, bring them in too, and do all the transformation outside of it. And again, if these are things that ought to be in the database, well, then put them in the database over time, but don't wait for the database. This is stuff that can be done fairly rapidly. Oh, so I have a question here for you all. Apparently you can raise your hand. So there's a panel on the right where you can raise your hand, and we're asking a question. How many of you have or are using predictive modeling? If you could just click on the little hand up button, we'll raise your hand and we'll see it, and we'll do a rough tally here. So we're looking at it while we talk. So yeah, we're curious as to how many of you are doing this, in-house on your team. And then there's another question in the chat box. If you could enter in what's your biggest challenge when it comes to predictive modeling, we'd love to get that too. And if we don't get all of this answered here, we'll answer it in follow-up. Two great questions from my team we'd like to see your input on. So they're coming in, we're watching. And there are some more questions as well. So it's like modeling so far, we've got like 10% of you are using predictive modeling today. Well, that may go up as we wait a little longer. And you saw, I guess the other thing, the thing is we went into the pages behind this. The thing is, there's tools like ours that have integrated these things together. So when I do a selection like this on these giving bins, these giving bins could have been formed by a macro in our world. It could have been done in the database, but you're actually tagging rows of data in the underlying table that's in memory, and all these other charts are updating. So you're seeing what this group looks like, but it's also setting, in our app, the metrics for the model. So you don't have to export the data out of here. It's all a contained vehicle where that massive data comes in and all gets blended and synthesized. You visually explore it, you make the selection visually, then you just click run, and the model runs in the same container. And then when you get the output over here, this data is sitting in a container, and I'm going to start it up again. So I've got all the raw underlying data, so as I spin through it, it's changing, and I can export the results back out of here, into Excel. This is something people neglect. At some point, you want the outputs. I'm going to do what I did again. I'm going to grab the top donors who are highly the high capacity people who are also highly engaged owners who aren't staffed, which is this bar up here. And I think I went to the map and who live in California or the Bay Area, even more specifically, and get rid of them. And then there's this list on the first page that's who they are, and this could have addresses and phone numbers. And I'm done with this. I want this out of here. I'm working on a web browser. I could just drop it down to my desktop. Here's that list out of here in Excel. So that was literally what it took me 10 seconds. I got my list of 24 people who are high capacity and highly engaged and live in the Bay Area and aren't staffed. And I can actually see it. I mean, here's total lifetime giving, Virginia Chen. Class year, she's not staffed. There's no name. She's got a rating of 5 million. She's highly engaged. And this could have all the other columns, you phone number, address, whatever. But these tools, like, it's not just the model. It's putting this out to the team so they can use the model and answer questions like this and not get stuck. But then here's the list, because if somebody's setting the dinner up, they actually probably want the list in Excel with the relevant contact information or whatever to go for it. And that's what we're finding is these, this doing it in this form is empowering the research teams, the development teams, field officers even. This is a little bit rich for them, but most of them. But they can cut these lists and get them out. And we are finding they're getting empowered. We're also seeing on the advancement services side huge reductions. One of our clients, I think it was Ithaca College, in the last webinar we did, we put a chart in which they let us use that showed their advancement services requests for queries like this dropped by like 80% when they implemented something like this. So it frees that team up to do more strategic things versus answer all these query requests back and forth to the frontline teams. So a whole lot of benefit, we believe, in getting this stuff in-house with models that you can build and tune and understand, and then pushing it out in this very easily to use, understandable format. That's probably the key of this whole thing. So how are we doing with our numbers? We've got 13 out of like, so that's like 15% of you, it looks like, are currently using predictive modeling, which is a really good group. And here are some of the challenges that have come in. Yeah, let me just read through them. Budget and time. Yep, that's a typical challenge. Biggest challenge is finding the time to dedicate. Yeah, so time. Two biggest challenges: knowing what information to use for modeling. Yeah, that's a good one. But that's back to, explanatory factors and thinking through what might influence the target. I mean, so when we do a modeling workshop, we will be on flip charts in the whiteboard, just thinking this stuff through with the team, like from 9 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and people are going, when are we going to build a model? Like, the model doesn't take long to build. It runs in like 4 minutes. But that setup time and just having that time to think about it and work it through is really important. And that's where you figure out what information to use, and you can vet it, challenge it, and then the modeling becomes like a hypothesis testing and validation. Reject, change, add. Yeah, this is great. Right on. Keep it. Getting access to the people who can execute models. The skill sets for that are somebody who can build a model is somebody who has an inquisitive mind, somebody who is Excel savvy, somebody who can understand relationships and causality. Those are probably the 3 key characteristics. And people with that, we have examples of English and history majors who could, one of our consultants is an English major, and she's awesome at this stuff, but she can think this stuff through, and she's just curious and inquisitive. Variable selection and lack of data is a challenge. Biggest challenge, getting started. I'm a one-person shop with little to no knowledge of modeling. Yeah, there's some small shops that we will, so we can run beside somebody, and like there's consultants who can come beside you in those cases. Obviously, if you don't have a team, it's hard to do it. That's probably where outside firms and consultants can come in if you see the value. It's costly. It doesn't have to be that costly, especially your team can pick it up. So if you have the resources, the inquisitive minds, the Excel savvy people who can sort of think causally, if they can do it in Excel, they can do this kind of stuff. We are doing some predictive modeling, but we are one school out of several, so we limit our ability to really build things out, make changes to the greater database. Yeah, that's back to like, in that case, if you can get access to the data, you can pull it into these front-end tools. Like, we're like Excel on steroids. Everything I did here is in an Excel-like desktop app. So there's ways around that. For those of you who are doing modeling, what advice can you offer to get started in the chat box? And I see okay, we may catch this afterwards because we're right at the 2 o'clock time, or 3 o'clock time. We are starting to think about this seriously, however, staff resources, yep. Determining which data points will be useful in predictive modeling. We have an RFM score, but poor data on visitations, event attendance, yeah. The good news about if you don't have the event attendance and all that, if you have a year or two, it starts getting reasonable. I mean, this stuff has a tail. It doesn't last that long. It's not like reunions or giving history. It goes back maybe 10 years. Reunions goes back further. But event attendance fades. Like if you went to a president's dinner 10 years ago, it's probably irrelevant. If you went to one in the last few years, 2-3 years, it is relevant. So that if you start collecting it now, and it doesn't take that long to build it out. Next one, finding the time, convincing other folks that a proper model is better than lifetime giving. Yeah, isn't an alum. Yeah, we've heard that, and oftentimes. So again, the modeling, if you frame it in like language in ways like that are intuitive to the front line, they're going to pick up on and use it more. So we really caution if your models end up with scores and look like models, it freaks people. We even had one where the thing had capacity scores in it, like by dollar amount, and people were just quibbling and rejecting it. So we shifted and put in wealthy zip codes because they couldn't argue the person lived in, Greenwich, Connecticut or something as a fact. So there's stuff like that you just have to watch. We've actually backed away from some, in some cases, better scores, the things that are less controversial so people actually use it, and then we move to the better scores in time. People are people. No dedicated person. Biggest challenge is acceptance of using data-driven techniques. Yeah, if you can get some wins, with all this stuff, if you can get some wins and the major giving team realizes, hey, we found some prospects and they actually gave a gift, and instead of 20,000, we got up to $500,000 and we picked up 480 because we listened to what this thing said, and you get once or twice somebody stands up and says, yeah, the data helped me get $480,000 more dollars or helped me improve my annual fund yield. In that example we gave, I can tell you there was a lot of resistance to cutting the sends back. When the manager did it and it worked, everybody said, awesome, this is great. So you need wins, and you need to start with something and get a win and then build on it. But yeah, there's a lot of organizational resistance in fundraising to data, and I think in time that'll change, but it's been more of an art than a science. Yeah, I want to hear that. What do you do if you know a 5-digit zip includes very high end and very low end capacity? Yeah, that's the breakdown of the zips. There's some communities where you've got vacation areas where you have the top of the top and you have really low income. In general, it works well. It breaks New York up into reasonable areas in most communities, but there's exceptions out there, which is why a detailed wealth screen or a researcher assessment is always going to be better. But it gets you started. In healthcare fundraising, you have all these people, and you can't possibly wealth screen them all. So you take the wealth zip, you do something with patient potential, you have a group you can just dig in and go further on. I think I'd say the same thing everywhere. Any other questions here? Yeah, I realize we're at the 3 o'clock Eastern time. I see we've got a lot of people still on, so obviously their questions are engaging. I'm just sensitive to time here. Anything else? Well, I'd say if you put more questions than we have, then we'll dialogue back. And this has been recorded, and I'm going to go to my last page. We'll have it out to you, wherever it is, within the week. And you can always follow up. We love this stuff. We do a lot of it. And, we're pretty practical, and we're trying to, you can work with us and be a client, or we're pretty open on just counseling and coaching up to a point. So just dialogue with us. We're here. We do a lot of work in this area, and we'd love to see those last couple of questions, this whole sector become more data-driven and become more fact-based. And there's a lot. We've seen it really grow in the last, we've been doing this for 10 years now, and we've seen big changes, and it's totally going in the direction, but it's, from a data perspective, probably behind other, we call this as a form of consultative selling and marketing, other sectors, but it's going in the right direction. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of the day.